All right, exponents. Everyone put the iPads away. Sometimes people make a mistake. They look at this and they'll say the answer is 6.
9.
It's 9. What they're doing wrong is 3 and 2, and it just pops in your mind 3 times 2 is 6. But remember, an exponent means you take whatever the base is times itself that many times. 3 times 3. Cleo, you're supposed to go. Someone's coming to get you or something. So, properties of exponents. There's the product power, power of a power, power of a product. So, this product one, remember product means to multiply? Do it with numbers first. If you have the same base, if you wrote this out the long way, 3 to the third would be 3 times 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 3.
Oh, if you're the same base, don't you just add them?
Right. So the shortcut is, if it's the same base, all you got to do is add the exponents. It's 3 to the 8th. So in some of these problems, they tell you to evaluate. If it's evaluate, you'd use a calculator to figure this out. Most of them just say write it as a power. So you just got to write it like that, simplified. So if it's a letter, x to the 5th times x to the 10th, x to the 15th. You just got to add the exponents. So that's the product of powers property. The power of a power, it's really, if you just use your math rules, if you got 3 squared and then you take that to the 3rd power, you multiply them, yep. What this means is you've got a 3 squared times a 3 squared times a 3 squared. There's 3 of these 3 squares. Then this just gets back to this property, where when they're the same base, you can just add the tops. The shortcut is, when it's a power raised to a power, you multiply them. So x to the 5th raised to the 4th would be x to the 20th. Then the last one, if you've got 2 things, we'll just do a real easy one. There's 2 ways to do this one. If there's numbers, you would take 3 times 4 is 12, and then you'd square it, right? PEMDAS, parentheses first, then exponents. But what you can do is you could do 3 squared times 4 squared. So when it's numbers, you would actually figure it out, but if it was letters, if you had xy to the 5th, that would be x to the 5th, y to the 5th. Because you got to take each of them to the 5th. If these have exponents on them, x cubed y to the 2nd raised to the 4th power. What would this one? That'd be x12, y8, because it's a power to a power, which means you multiply. So you just need to memorize which ones you do. When it's the same base multiplied together, you add the tops. But when there's just one base with 2 exponents, then you multiply those 2. So these first ones are pretty simple. Simplifying 4 to the 3rd times 4 to the 5th is 4 to the 8th. You would just add those. Here there's 3 of them. They all got the same base, so you just add the tops. Yep, y to the 15th. 6 squared times 6. Remember, if there is nothing there, that means it's a 1. So that would be 6 to the 3rd, 2 plus 1. Since these are in parentheses, this would be negative 3 to the 1st times negative 3 to the 7th. You got to leave it in parentheses. it'd be negative 3 to the 8th. And you do gotta keep the parentheses around it if it originally has a parenthesis. So remember the ones, we've learned this before, but if you had negative 2 to the 4th and negative 2 to the 4th, you're gonna get two different answers on these two problems. Reason why is the 4 is hooked to the parenthesis here. So this means you take negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. The negatives will cancel. So that's going to be positive 16. Here the 4 is only hooked to the 2. So the negative stays there. And then 2 to the 4th is 16. Now that really only affects it if it's an even number. Because if it's odd, the negative would stay there. 2 to the 3rd is 8. Here, negative times negative is still negative 8. So when it's an odd exponent, it really doesn't affect it. But if it's an even, it will matter if it's got parentheses or not. So, power of a power, 7 to the 3rd to the 5th, 7 to the 15th. You gotta multiply. A power to a power, you just multiply. Here they've got the brackets, the way they look, it doesn't mean you do something different. They just use the rounded brackets and the square brackets to, so it doesn't look as cluttered. It could be written like this. That would be the same as with that. It's just sometimes it's easier to read if you use different style of brackets. So all this is it's negative 2 to the 4th to the 3rd. It would be negative 2 to the 12th. On this one, this 6 to the 4th would change to a 10. And this is a b minus 1. If they're not hooked together, you can't just write this as b to the 10th minus 1 to the 10th. The only time you can do that, where you can put the multiplied times, is if they're together, if they're multiplied together. The reason why is this. You'll get into this a lot more in Algebra 2, but b minus 1 to the 10th would actually be b minus 1 times b minus 1 times b minus 1. It'd be 10 of them together, right? And when you do this, you got a FOIL. B times b is b squared. B times the... Just these two together is b squared minus 2b plus 1. That's just two of them. Then you got to take that times this, and then there, and so on.
Would it be 24?
Oh yeah, you're right. Yep. It's 6 to the 4th. You got to multiply 6 times 4. So then you notice here, what's in the parentheses, they're all multiplied together. So if they ever got a plus or a minus in between, you can't multiply that exponent times it. So all we got to do here is just 2 to the 3rd times 3 to the 3rd. And if they tell you to leave it as a power, then you're done. If they tell you to evaluate, which they do right here, then you're actually going to multiply it. Which it would be quicker just to go 2 times 3 is 6, and then raise to the 3rd power. Now on the calculators, the power key on these is a y to the x, like that. It's this key right above the divide. On these calculators, do you know which key you use for exponents? The caret key, yep, right there. So this would just be 6 to the 3rd, 216. So here, since all of this is squared, you got to square the 9, you got to square the x, and you got to square the y. So the only thing we can simplify in this is what? 9 squared. So that would just change to 81, and these we can't do anything more to because we don't know what they are, so you just leave it like that. Same thing here. The -3 is raised to the 4th, and the z is raised to the 4th. We can figure out, when they do say to simplify, what -3 to the 4th is. So since this is in parentheses, what's going to happen to that negative sign? Disappear, because there's an even amount of them. So 3 to the 4th is 81, z to the 4th. Here the negative is out in front, so that's just going to stay there. Then we've got a 4 to the 3rd and a w to the 3rd. 4 to the 3rd is 4 times 4 times 4 is 64. W to the 3rd. The negative is just going to stay right out in front. Now we get into where everything is combined. So all you got to do is use these three properties. The first thing is right here. All of this has to be squared. So you take the 7 and square it, would be 49. I'm going to write it here. The w squared would make w to the 4th. The z cubed squared would be z to the 6th, yep, because when it's a power to a power, you multiply, times another z to the 4th. So these two you can combine. Z to the 6th times z to the 4th is z to the 10th. Remember, when it's got the same base, then you just add the exponents. So, again, here, it's the same base, so it'd be -4 to the 9th or 18th. Do you add them or do you multiply them? Add them. 3 plus 6 is 9. Since they say to simplify, that means you'd have to use a calculator to figure it out. So -4 to the 9th is -262,144. W 10th times W, if there's nothing there, that means there's a 1 there. So it's just W cubed. D to the 4th to the 5th, you multiply. So it'd be D to the 20th. 6p squared, you got to square the 6. 6 squared is 36. P squared is just p squared. Here you can do all of them. If I take 4 times, or if I take the negative to the 4th power, the negative is going to cancel. Because a negative times a negative times a negative times a negative is a positive. Then you got to take 2 to the 4th. 2, 4, 8, 16. Then you take the x to the 4th and the y to the 4th. And then here you just got to simplify it in bunches and then put together whatever you can, like we did here. We got to take all of these to the 5th. So 2 to the 5th is 32. W to the 5th. Z squared to the 5th is z to the 10th. And then this one, we've got to take the w squared and the z squared. Yeah.
Shouldn't 2 be W11?
Number 2. Oh yeah, where did I get a 3 from? So, you don't have to put the numbers first, but it's just easier to read and easier to look at. The 32, there is no other numbers to do anything with, so put that down. Then the w's, it's all multiplied together, so it'd be w to the what? 7. Because it's all multiplied, so you take the 5 plus the 2. And then the z's, there's 10 of them and 2 of them, which makes 12.